Thanks for listening to Exploring the Wine Glass podcast, the podcast for people who love wine. I'm Lori Budd, a UC Davis winemaking program and WSET Level 2 graduate. You can find Exploring the Wine Glass on all the socials as well as your favorite podcast catchers. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. I promise I'll never tell you what to drink, but I'll always share what's in my glass. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Exploring the Wine Glass. Today, I am bringing you along as I learn about sherry through another virtual tasting. Jerez is one of the oldest wine growing regions in the world, but in all honesty, I know very little about it. During the WSET Level 2 class, sherry was covered, but rather briefly. I have not had many sherries, and I have promised myself that I will attempt to make myself more familiar with them. So when I heard that there was going to be an episode of Raid Your Cellar dedicated to sherry, I knew it was one that I had to listen in. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. As I learned, there is a sherry for any occasion, and unlike my initial thoughts, it is not just all grandma's sweet after dinner drink. From the dry and light Fino wines to the subtly bitter taste of a cold glass of Manzanilla or the sweetness and caramel hints of a cream, sherry truly is a wine that can be paired with any food pairing. So unscrew, uncork, or savor a bottle, sit down, and enjoy the conversation. Sherry is a wine that is misunderstood by the market, and I hope that this episode helps you navigate your way through those confusing waters. Sláinte!
Well, welcome everyone to Raid Your Cellar. This week we are going to be talking and tasting everything and all you need to know about sherry. What you're about to see tonight is we have a special sherry expert with us, Lucas. And Lucas will guide us through a little bit about the region, but also what everyone else is tasting, and we'll taste all together. And the concept of this is basically all these wine lovers from all these different backgrounds come together around a virtual kitchen table to talk about wine. I'm super excited once again because this week Benchmark Wine Group will be teaming up with the United Sommeliers Foundation to support sommeliers who are out of work during these times. And I'm going to kick it off to Eric Siegelbaum. Eric, can you please tell everybody a little bit more about the foundation?
Sure, with pleasure. First of all, thank you all for being here. We're really excited to have this incredible panel. Also to have you all here talk about one of my favorite misunderstood subjects, to say the least. We'll get to sherry in a minute. So the United Sommeliers Foundation was formed a little over 3 months ago out of the recognition that sommeliers tend to be the first to be let go and the last to be brought back in times when restaurants are trying to cut expenditures. We formed it as a charitable organization, and to date we have raised nearly $1 million. We've distributed financial grants to over 700 sommeliers with more money coming in and more money going out and counting. So through the generous donations of the entire hospitality community and individuals like yourselves who just love to eat and drink, we appreciate your support of our organization, which is helping hundreds and soon to be thousands of people pay their rent, keep a roof over their head, feed their families, provide medicine for themselves, take care of their healthcare needs and whatnot. So we're extremely grateful for you all to be here and support. Again, if you're here just viewing, not on the panel, donations are not required. This is completely free. However, no amount is too small. I'll post the link to our site. Even if it's $5, $10, $20, everything counts. Everything makes a difference. And we really, truly appreciate it and are super grateful for your support. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Eric. And Lucas, now I'm going to turn it over to you. Welcome, Lucas. Thank you.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this sherry episode. There are so many things to say about sherry that it's hard to summarize in just a few minutes. But I will start by saying that this is one of the oldest wine-growing regions in the world, in history of mankind. Going back to 3,000 years when the Phoenicians started to grow some vines here and make some drink out of those grapes. And then we have the Romans and Carthaginians and the Arabs and all these other societies that spent some time in the region, and they all brought their own know-how and understanding and ways to do things, and the region evolved during those 3,000 years, always producing some sort of wine or spirit or some sort of drink. And this is one of the most multicultural wine regions you can come across. Not only because of that long history and all the different backgrounds that took over the winemaking at some point, but also because of the tremendous diversity that it offers. And when we talk about Jerez, hopefully that will be illustrated today here around this table. We always need to talk about diversity. And when I say diversity, this could be possibly the driest wine you're going to have on any single occasion, but also the sweetest wine you're going to have on that same day. And many things in between, because there are many different styles of sherry, from very dry to very sweet. There are very different ways to age the wines and different profiles that these wines show after they're coming out of those wineries. And we always say there's always some sherry that will have to please you at some point, because there's such a broad choice you can choose from. So we'll try to touch upon all the different products that are being produced by the region. But maybe we start with introducing everybody.
All right, let's start with Dave. Dave Parker, why don't you introduce yourself and let us know what you're drinking?
Okay, well, I'm David Parker. I'm CEO of Benchmark Wine Group. And this is an experience for me because I'm just learning about sherry. What I've got here is a Cellar 1955 Palo Cordado, and it is from Jerez Barquero. What I've learned, this is a pretty special wine. The fleur, which is the cap on the wine, in this case, is partial and is light, so it's getting both a good oxidized flavor, but it's still got a lot of brilliance to it. So this is full of oranges, this is full of honey, this is full of caramel, but it's still got a really good beam of brightness to it and a great, really long finish.
Dave, I have to say, I love you, but I also hate being on these things with you because you just completely eclipse with what you have access to through Benchmark. You just completely eclipse what I'm going and pulling from my cellar. It's I'm just casually drinking this, 70-year-old Solera situation here. So once again, you nailed it, man.
Well, it's an awesome wine, and Mr. Gibson down there in the corner has been my teacher, and he's a fantastic teacher. So in about an hour, I got a crash course in everything about sherry. You saw I put 4 up there. I might pull another one out at some point if it fits in with what you guys are doing. But what I learned is that sherry at every level is exciting. It goes with everything from chicken to nuts to, I guess, seafood. The saltiness to it in a lot of cases. It's a really exciting wine. It's a real treat to be able to learn that.
We think that Jerez is the ultimate bearing wine, or food bearing wine, because of that diversity that we mentioned at the beginning. You can go from oysters to cigars. You can pair 20 or 30 course pairing menu with Jerez only. So that, again, broad choice and different styles that you can get out of the region. And you can really have a wine from Jerez not only any time out of the day, but anytime you think that feeling like you want to have something a little bit different, because all these wines compared to any table wine, they really do taste quite different. Some of them more, some of them less, but that uniqueness you get out of the region is something that really sets it apart from any more standard wine. And I know you guys are doing these tables around other other wine regions. But Jerez is very special right off the bat because of the unique profile of the wines, whether these are more like Fino, Manzanilla styles, Amontillado, Oloroso, or then the cream of the sweeter styles. All of them are quite different from anything else you can taste out there.
Yeah. And that's what I found. It's unlike any other wine I've ever had, but it seems to be incredibly food friendly.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to lend itself to drinking lightly and enjoying, just sipping small amounts, and it seems like a very social wine too.
Absolutely.
Shall we go to Peter Gibson? Peter, why don't you introduce yourself? And I know you have a lot to say about sherry, so I'm excited to see what you're drinking.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm Peter Gibson. I'm the editor of Wine Market Journal, and I'm also a sherry fanatic of many years, probably decades. And I agree that it's the most food-friendly wine in the world. I love the saltiness of a saltiness of a Manzanilla, the richness of a mature Fino, the nuttiness of a great Amontillado, all the way up to just the incredible resonance of an Oloroso. Today, I'm drinking two wines from Rey Fernando de Castilla, the Fino Antique, which is a very rare style of Fino. It's very old. So the floor, as we know, the floor is the protective layer of yeast that protects the wine against oxidation, yet also it's sort of a symbiotic relationship whereby the yeasts, the floor, sit atop the wine and protect it against oxidation, but also take from the wine nutrients and glycerol. And that's why these wines are so dry and so incisive, is that all that sweetness, all glycerol has been converted by this protective layer of floor. This wine is probably about 12 to 15 years old before it's bottled, so the floor is about to fall and become an Amontillado. And then the producer tends to, he likes the English style of Fino, which is a little bit more alcohol, so he fortifies this up to 20%. And it makes for this incredibly rich, resinous, complex, delicious, food-friendly Fino, one that I probably pull more than any other sherry because A, it's available to me, but also because I really love it. It's just an absolute joy to drink this wine. The other wine is also from Fernando de Castilla, which is from their premium singular line, which is about a 70-year-old Oloroso. Oloroso is different from Fino in that it does not go under any floor protection. It basically is it is fortified almost immediately and allowed to mature oxidatively in the barrel. And this yields a wine of really greater girth and substance and weight, but perhaps less of the saltiness, incisiveness, or delicacy you get from an Amontillado or a wine that does have floor activity. So I haven't tasted this one yet, so I'm going to go ahead and taste that now. But it's a real joy to be here. I hope we can really turn the world on to these exceptional wines. They have history, they have diversity, everything going for them. We just have to familiarize people with the flavors and get them past the initial, oh my goodness, what is this?
I think you're absolutely right, Peter. And I think for a lot of people that don't know anything about sherry, it's the fact that they don't know anything about sherry that stops them from pursuing more. So hopefully everyone out there will start tasting some more sherries in the future. Let's go to Felipe.
May I add one little thing, Michelle, please?
Yes, of course.
We're going to do Riesling next week, and I think Riesling and sherry are both wines that are fully misunderstood by the market, and they both require sort of an ambassador, somebody to take the new wine lover, hold their hand and say, let me take you. It's safe to go into the water, basically.
I volunteer as tribute.
We have an amazing ambassador for next week, but I'll let everybody know who that is at the end of this episode. So, Felipe, can you introduce yourself and let us know what you are drinking from that magnificent cellar you have?
So, my name is Felipe Gonzalez Gordon. I'm a fifth-generation family member from the Gonzalez Villas family in Jerez. The winery was founded by my great-great-grandfather in 1835, so, you can say that I was raised on sherry. I always like when I'm talking about sherry, I always like to, really underscore the fact that sherry is an appellation, okay? It's the appellation of Jerez in Spain. It's just we anglicized the name. And you do find in the market a lot of products labeled sherry that are not true to origin. So I think it's important when you're seeking out sherry, if you want to seek out and find the really good stuff, the authentic stuff, that you make sure it's the real thing from the source, from Spain, from Jerez. It's an appellation just like Burgundy, just like Bordeaux. So in the same way as you can find, Gallows Burgundy, that's not really Burgundy, we know. And the same thing, you can find other kinds of sherry, Fairbanks sherry that isn't sherry. Sherry is an appellation, and as such, there are many producers. The specific grapes, there's a specific winemaking aspects that the specific terroir at the same time, and all of these elements are what make these wines singular, and they can't be replicated anywhere else in the world. So with that preamble, I would like to talk about what I am drinking and segue into what Peter was saying, talking about the different styles. I'm drinking right now a very old Amontillado. This is called Amontillado del Duque, and it is age certified sherry. Here you see that it's a VORS sherry, and that means that the average age is 30 years. So it's a 30-year-old sherry. And we talk in terms of average because sherry, I'm sure, is going to be discussed later, are aged using a system called the Cellar system, by which many vintages are blended together in order to achieve a consistent style. This is also done in Champagne. I find a lot of similarities between sherry and Champagne. Riesling too, as well. It needs to be, but with Champagne we have that chalky soil that is very similar to the one that found in Champagne, and we have that winemaking procedure of blending different styles different vintages in order to achieve a consistent style. So this is a 30-year-old Amontillado. It starts its life off as a Fino, aging under the floor yeast, which is basically the same yeast that causes fermentation. After fermentation, it floats to the surface and provides a protection against the ambient air, avoiding oxidation. But the yeast is a living organism. It feeds on the nutrients it finds in the wine. And as years go by, that yeast finds less and less nutrients in the wine, and it begins to, starve, if you would like. And then once it begins to die off as a result of starvation, the wine begins a slowly oxidative process. So Amontillado is a style that has seen biological aging under the floor, getting all of the character and all of the nuances of the floor yeast biological aging, but also the aspects of oxidative aging in the presence of air, and hence this color. Because I'm sure it will be mentioned as well, sherries are made from white grapes, but we get wines of these color, and that is the result of a desired and desirable oxidation. This Amontillado is bone dry, has less than 3 grams of residual sugar. It's 21% in alcohol, even though in its inception it was only 45 to 15, but due to aging and concentration, the alcohol has also increased during the aging, and it's just mind-blowing. It's super intense, super dry, that has that salinity, those hazelnuts aroma that characterize a great sherry. And I have a couple of other things that I will taste. We'll talk about later because I brought out all the big guns. So we'll talk about vintage aging for sherries as opposed to Cellar system.
Maybe we should go back a few steps because we're starting to see a lot of diversity and different wines here. So maybe let's go back to the beginning and say, well, these are all wines coming from, most of them coming from the same grape variety. We're talking about one single grape variety, Jerez, which is the Palomino Fino. Then there are other two that are just used to produce sweet wines, but at a much minor proportion. So let's say one grape variety, quite small region. We only talk about 18,000 acres of the vineyard site in Andalusia, in the Cádiz province. So all this diversity comes from a few things. The grape is the same, the soil is the same, the terroir, the vine growing, everything is equal. But then you have grapes that are coming into the winery facility or the press facility, and then they start their journey. You can have different styles of base wine depending on the pressing, depending on where these wines are coming from. And then from here, you're going to start what's known as the fortification process. Because remember, Jerez is one of those 45 wine regions of the world. And there are other, as historic 45 wine regions in the world, like Or, Madeira, Marsala, or the famous wines from southern France, or other wines from other parts. Even a wine from Victoria in Australia is considered a classic 45 wine these days. But anyways, the difference between Jerez and those is that for the vast majority of the grapes, that fortification, that addition of alcohol, will only occur once the ferment is complete. So we get the grapes, we press the juice out of them, we start a fermentation process, we complete it, and it's once that we have a dry base wine that we decide to add alcohol to that. From about 12%-ish ABV to either 15-ish% or 17%. And usually it coincides that the 15% alcohol wines will be those that are a little finer at their profile, on the palate, in the mouth, very delicate wines, maybe free-run juice, maybe from specific pagos of vineyards. Those wines at 50% alcohol will be the wines used to produce the Finos, and then the Amontillado that both Peter and Felipe are enjoying as well. And then the wines are a little bigger in the mouth. Those wines, those base wines, will be 45 all the way to 17%. But remember, any of those are dry because we're adding alcohol over a complete fermented out sugar wine. So based on that amount of alcohol that you add to those wines, let's say 15 versus 17%, the wines at 15% alcohol will show the ideal amount of alcohol for the famous local floor yeast to grow on the surface. And this is when we're making these Finos, like the one I'm enjoying by Lustau, Fino del Puerto, that at 15% alcohol after fortification, this is the ideal environment for that yeast to stay on top of the wine. Live on the surface in each and every single barrel within that Solera system. And these floor yeast, like in champagne, will ultimately affect the wine and shape the final taste of this wine. Taste and aroma. See, this is a wine that was in cask for 5 years, but being under the protection of that layer, the wine remains pale and oxidized, even reductive, because the yeast does a few things to the wine, but among those, the yeast protects the wine from any oxidation. So these Finos and Manzanillas, are wines that, as being kept under the floor, they will remain pale and oxidized and very yeast-driven, because the yeast will consume the nutrients, the alcohol, especially the glycerin, and will provide acetaldehydes. And all those things are the ones that you can taste out of these glasses. So Finos and Manzanillas, those are from fine base wines at 50% alcohol, and then Olorosos, the one that Peter was enjoying, the one that Eric has here in this bottle. Olorosos are from those wines that are a little coarser, a little bigger on the palate. The texture maybe more phenolic because of more skin contact. Those wines at 17% will never see floor yeast because too much alcohol in them, and those wines will be from day one exposed to oxygen. So those two are the measured families for any dry wines in Jerez. And again, most of the wines are dry. Then the blends, the sweeter wines, will be an aftermath. But the original wines are all dry or bone dry. Finos underfloor, Olorosos in contact with oxygen. So we start to see a lot of diversity here. But let's continue with.
Yeah, I think it would be cool because you were drinking a sherry from Puerto.
Yes.
I'm drinking sherry from Jerez, and Pia and Joaquin, I think, are drinking wines from San Luca.
Correct.
So maybe they should talk about the manzanillas they're drinking. Oh, and so is Michelle.
So Felipe, I think we should talk about the different cities or villages and the different styles in the Sherry Triangle, as well as the Montilla Morias Dio.
Okay. Sure. I mean, Sherry, we talk about the Sherry Triangle. So this is the area which formed by the cities of El Puerto de Santa Maria, Sanlúcar de Barrameda, and Jerez de la Frontera. There you go, Sherry Triangle.
There you go.
Yeah, but let's have the people that are drinking Manzanilla talk a little bit. I'll just briefly say Montilla Moriles is a different appellation. They work with they make similar style of wines, but it's in Córdoba, it's all the way inland in Andalusia, and they work mainly with the Pedro Jimenez grape. And the wines are more full-bodied, a little heavier, and well, the term amontillado it really is Montilla style. So because those wines were heavier and a little darker, more oxidized. But let the people that are tasting Manzanilla talk about it. Joaquin, Pia, Michelle, Eric, go for it.
I'll go for it. So yeah, I've got this Manzanilla from Fino. This is a bit of the other side of the tracks than the rest of these sherries. It's a little more budget-friendly sherry, if you will. But yeah, so the Deliciosa is actually made by the owner's daughter, Maribel. The owner is Jose Esteban. I speak German, not Spanish, I'm sorry.
Jose Esteban.
There we go. Yeah, but this producer actually also makes a Fino called Innocent Fino, and it's the only natural cask sherry only naturally cask fermented Fino left, apparently, which is pretty cool. But yeah, it's amazing, and it's, like you said, like super light in color compared to what some of these people are drinking, and yeah, just incredible.
Sure. Would someone want to talk about the difference between Finos and Manzanillas and the origin in Jerez and San Lucar?
Well, there are a few other things to add to the complexity of the region, and that's where the wines are located. And definitely the triangle is a big thing here. We have 3 towns, as Felipe was saying, and the 3 towns are apart, a few miles. Not a very large circle area, but definitely all the 3 different towns enjoy 3 different climatic or weather conditions throughout the year. So the thing about these 3 towns and why they're so important is because in Jerez, by the rules, you can make wines from grapes from all over the region, and the region is made up by about 9 different towns and municipalities. But you have to age the wines within the township of these 3 particular cities: Sanlúcar, El Puerto, and Jerez. And the fact that you age the wines in one of these 3, the different local situation, conditions, and weather will ultimately impact the taste of the wines. So a Manzanilla, which is a Fino biological underfloor style of Jerez, coming from Sanlúcar, that Manzanilla, after 5, 6, 8, or 10 years, aged in one of the casks or one of the aging facilities in that city, that Manzanilla will acquire certain profile, certain taste that will be distinguished or different from a Fino that is made exactly the same way, but aged in this case in El Puerto, or a Fino like the one that Peter was enjoying that is aged in Jerez. So the location, it's, as well as the oxidation and length of aging, is one of the things that make Jerez such a complex region. And the three towns have an important role when it comes to provide different profiles. I think we have a classic Manzanilla, La Gitana, somewhere around here. Is that right?
This one?
Michelle, yeah, tell us about that one.
So actually, this is my first time trying this sherry, and I was super impressed at how fresh it was and lively, and there was a lot of apple notes that I wasn't expecting at all from sherry, which was surprising for me. But why is it classic? I'm not sure.
Well, a Manzanilla is a wine that has been produced for many, many years. The actual Jerezes that we know today, they're about 250 or 280 years old. And any biological wine, any wine aged under floor, is the way Sanluqueños, people from Sanlúcar, and among them the Hidalgo family, used to make the wines ever since. So the classic wine from Sanlúcar is a biological wine made like La Gitana. And this is maybe a 5 or 8 year old wine that has been aged under that layer of yeast in the conditions of Sanlúcar. And that Manzanilla, with that green apple, yeasty, ultra dry, very, very lean, and very, very crisp palate, that's a classic taste that anyone would expect from a Manzanilla. So Hidalgo La Gitana definitely is a producer, a benchmark producer, and this label that you're enjoying is one of their most important wines, being a Manzanilla that really shows everything you expect from that type of wine.
So maybe Joaquin, you want to talk about yours, and then
Sure.
I'd like to say a couple of other things, if I may.
Yeah, it's Joaquin Quirante. I am a banker, so nothing to do with the wine professional world, but I love wine. And I was born in the south of Spain, so for me, Jerez has been part of my life since I was a child. This is not politically correct to say that, but I've been drinking Jerez since I was 12 or 13 with my father. So something that nowadays would sound a little bit strange, but those days it was, normal. So I started with Manzanilla. This is Manzanilla that I got. It's Manzanilla and Rama. So there is no filter, nothing, and then Felipe or Lucas can explain what Rama means. And I found this is a small producer, and I found this really fresh, really unbelievable. It's like breathing the, from Sanlúcar. So
that's sea breeze, right? Okay.
The sea breeze is unbelievable. So it's the first time I'm drinking this Manzanilla, and I decided to try it today in this panel, and this is really amazing. And then after that, because it was when I started, then I changed to this is
to Cuatro Palmas, which is an amontillado. I was playing with an amontillado is completely different. I mean, the Manzanilla, that's 15 degrees of alcohol, which I said 21, right, Felipe?
Mm-hmm.
And then you can go from Manzanilla, Fino and Rama, then go to an older Fino, and then ended up with the amontillado. This is on the dry side, and then you can continue up to all this thing. For me, Jerez, it's amazing the different kinds and different flavors of the wine, and it's interesting that you cannot find anything like that anywhere else in the world. So this is what makes Jerez so unique, and this is my thoughts that I would like to share with you. So
very cool. Thank you, Joaquin.
May I add a little something?
Talking about. Do you want to also, since you're going to talk, Peter, do you want to talk a little bit about the geographical position of Jerez versus Sanlúcar? Because I wanted to go.
Exactly where I was going, Felipe.
All right, you go for it.
So Sanlúcar and El Puerto are closer to the ocean, closer to the river than Jerez, which is inland. So the bodegas are cooler. They're inundated with more salty sea breeze. The wines are aged slower because of the coolness, and they turn out to have a higher level of finesse, less body, less alcohol, less girth, if you would. And that's why they're so revered in the wine world. They're sort of like the cabinets of the sherry world. They're just ethereally light and salty and delicious and perfect with crustaceans. Like Finos from Jerez, it's warmer, but they talk about the terroir of the bodega too. You have the terroir of the village and the pagos, and the Albarita soil. It's all very important, but each bodega has its own, if you would, it has its own floor. It's almost like a sourdough culture in a sense that each bodega has its own little nuance of difference with the floor culture that they have created over the many centuries of making wine, and this comes through in the wine. So you could buy the same neutral wine from the cooperative and age it in Jerez, and you can age it down the street at a different bodega. You can age it in El Puerto, and you can age it in Sanlúcar, and the wines will all taste radically different.
Yep. Super valid point. And so if you want to geek out, I mean, sherry is the place to go.
Yeah,
that's all I can say. It's just fun.
Most definitely, and not only the influence of that proximity of getting closer to the ocean as far as the aging facilities has an impact. Also the origin of the grapes. So we're combining two terroir concepts here. We're combining the origin, where those grapes are coming from, and these pagos could be just at the coastline or very close to the ocean, or they could be very far inland. And we combine that terroir aspect, that terroir concept, with the terroir from the bodega, as Peter was saying, because these bodegas, showing a very specific architecture design, they are ideal places to create the proper conditions for the Asian wines. But all of them could have potentially different shapes and sizes. So that creates an environment that will ultimately affect the creation of, or the formation of the floor yeast, some of them from different streams of Saccharomyces. And those yeast will start affecting the wine. We were saying the yeast will consume nutrients, will consume part of alcohol, a lot of sugars. That's why these are among the driest wines in the world, and a lot of glycerin. But depending on the yeast strain, these will be more effective or not at those specific jobs. And that will make wines that taste different. Although, as Peter was saying, these wines could be from the same base wines, but the fact that you're aging them in different locations, and when I say locations, I don't only mean a specific town, but bodegas within that town or even corners within that bodega, it gets as specific as, to the point. The wine will ultimately taste differently. So there are many aspects here that will at some point affect the final taste of the wine.
Lucas, if you allow me, and this wine is coming from one specific bota. There's only one bota in one specific location in González Villas. It's only one that you have, so it's completely different to the rest.
Yes, and that's a very good point, Paqui, because the Solera system is meant to be blending in all the different botas, and finally, every release, producing a wine that is close together, right? You want a wine that bottling after bottling shows kind of the same attributes, and that's why you kind of like blend everything together. Although these are wines that are literally sit in much smaller containers. These botas are 600 liter capacity botas, and you may have 500, 2,000, 20,000 botas making up, forming a single Solera. So when you blend them all together, you are making a single wine. But these capataces, these cellar masters, they know each and every bota as like their children. And they know that some of them could perform a little different. And in this case, our friend Antonio Flores from González Villas, he knows that that particular bota, these Cuatro Palmas, right, is at the point that he likes the most. And that's why we have some single cask sherries also bottled, because some of these botas, depending on where they are within that aging facility, they could be containing wine that is quite different after a few years.
It is amazing when you visit the bodega, the vineyard, and then you see so many botas, there may be 1,000 of them, and then you're drinking a wine that is coming from a single one.
Yeah.
I mean, you can see all these full of barrels. The botas is the sherry barrel, and then in a specific wine is coming from one specific barrel, and that's it. So it's really amazing.
Yeah.
So there's something super interesting, because sometimes you want to each barrel or each bota, it's a living universe, right? It has very distinctive and very unique character. It provides the winemaker or the master blender here an enormous palette of color with which to play and with which to paint whatever picture he wants to do. But sometimes some of these botas, some of these wines in these casks, because it's a living organism and it's influenced by what we were saying, the where the grapes came from, what township the winery is at, in what part of the city or the town that winery is, in what corner within that winery the bota is. All of that affects, because it's a living organism. It's a living wine. So sometimes winemakers say, okay, I just want to preserve this. I just want to preserve this character. I don't want to blend it with anything else. And the wine that Joaquin is referring to is among the more than 20,000 barrels botas that González Villas has. It's just this single one, and it's just it goes unblended. It just stays there, and the wine gets older every day. Right now, the current bottling of that, we bottle about maybe 58 bottles a year, so not very much. And that wine currently is over 50 years old, but it still has some floor. So it's incredibly unique. In traditional wineries, you talk about the vineyard side, and that's what you talk about. Here in Jerez, you can just zoom in a lot further. So you can find expressions, particularly in wineries that have these assets of numbers of barrels and treat each one of them individually, you just find really, really fascinating stuff. But I'd like to hear from Matthew, because we haven't heard him all night. So.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Exploring the Wine Glass is brought to you by Dracaena Wines. Dracaena Wines is an artisan winery located in Paso Robles, California. They have been producing wine since 2013. Their first vintage began with one wine, their classic Cabernet Franc, which received a 91 in Wine Enthusiast. Since then, they have increased production, received several accolades, including double gold medals in the San Francisco Chronicle Wine Competition and consistent 90-plus ratings. In addition to their classic Cabernet Franc, they now produce a single vineyard, single clone Reserve Cabernet Franc and a Rosé of Syrah. Although they've increased production every year, they continue to sell out each vintage. Find out more about Dracaena Wines and their award-winning wines at dracaenawines.com and let them help turn your moments into great memories.
Well, no,
That's a good thing, Felipe.
by the way, Mike might regret saying that, so thank you very much for the opportunity. Felipe, I wanted to touch on something that you talked about, which is incredibly valuable, because as you have in the sherry bodega, the different areas within the bodega itself produce different wines, and therefore lead to a single cask bottling, perhaps. That trend has morphed into what happens with whiskey, particularly with bourbon. And those whiskeys usually are the most expensive offering and the most unique and desirable offering from a particular distillery. So clearly there's a tie-in there with understanding the value that these single cask sherries represent if you extrapolate that to the next level, which is what do you do with a single barrel bourbon? And to that point, from just a commercial standpoint, that when you look at scotches, Macallan, of course, was the first Scotch company that really spoke about that they age their wines in sherry casks. There are desirable bottlings from many different Scotch distilleries that are in sherry cask, and I mean, Lucas can speak more to this. I'm sure that Lustau's doors are knocked on quite often by distilleries looking to buy barrels so that they can age their whiskeys in. But I appreciate that. So just real quickly, I have the unique distinction and the humble pleasure of working with the importer that represents Lustau in the United States, Europe. And my evening had began with a cocktail, really a spritz, which started with the Lustau Rojo Vermouth. Now, every winery, a lot of vermouth distilleries or producers have their own unique recipe. Most of these vermouths start with a base of still white wine. Lustau vermouths start with the base of sherry, and the Rojo Vermouth is a blend of Amontillado and a blend of Pedro Jimenez. So you've got the dry nuttiness from the Amontillado and a little bit of sweetness and richness from the Pedro Jimenez. Then I go into the Don Nuno Oloroso, which is what Eric is drinking at this moment. And then when we're done with the conversation, or towards the end of the conversation, I'm going to finish with a cream. However, I do have a Manzanilla in the fridge waiting for the fresh sea scallops that I bought today that I'm going to cook afterwards. So, the idea that sherry, as Lucas said, can transcend anything in your evening, whether it's the beginning of an evening with a spritz and a cocktail, or it's the end of the evening with a cream sherry. There is such a unique diversity to this region that it's incredible. And there was one of the questions that I saw on the thread, which is someone who is new to sherry. What should they look for? I hope what this discussion will demonstrate is you can look for almost anything, and sherry will give you that answer.
Exactly. Yes,
Matthew, that was beautiful. If I can, I wanted to sort of piggyback on what Matthew said and also tie in some of the things that Lucas, Joaquin, and Felipe just said, sort of bring this all together. First of all, don't discount sherry's use in cocktails. And one of my favorite cocktails on the planet is called an Adonis. And an Adonis is equal parts sherry and sweet vermouth, red vermouth. And I modify my Adonis. So an Adonis doesn't typically call for Oloroso sherry. It calls for Fino sherry, frankly, because it's often less expensive. But I prefer the richness that an Oloroso sherry adds to it. So whenever I make my Adonis, happens to be my fiance's favorite cocktail. The reason I even know it exists is because of her. So whenever we have Adonises, we use Oloroso sherry. And also, if you're going to really express an Adonis as perfectly as you can, use Lustau's vermouth, because it is a sherry-based vermouth. So it's a sherry life and a sherry life coming together. Don't discount sherry for cocktails. Please don't take after like my British parents and German and Austrian grandparents and believe that all sherry is like Harvey's Bristol cream sweet nonsense. Their cream sherries and sweet sherries can be delicious, but most sherries are dry. And as a sommelier, I can tell you one of the things that drives me nuts is that because sherry is fortified, it tends to end up on a dessert wine list. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen Finos and Manzanillas and Palo Cortados and all of these Olorosos on a dessert wine list because people don't know where to put it. Lastly, I'm really big on analogy, and I know there are a couple of you in the thread that said you were new to sherry. So I'm not new to sherry, and even I'm like, whoa, this is an intense conversation. So I wanted to suggest something to sort of tie in what Lucas and Felipe and Joaquin were saying about like how, and Peter, about like even where in the winery the barrel changes the sherry. I want you, since I think like there's been like a crazy run on flour and yeast because everybody's home baking now because of COVID, a good analogy is sourdough. Think about sourdough bread. It comes from a starter, a living yeasty starter. But the age of your starter, or in the cases it applies to sherry, is the age of the Cellar, the fractional blending barrel system, has a huge impact. The temperature that you keep your starter at, or in the case of sherry, where in the giant or small winery the barrel is, if it's up high or down low in this corner or that corner with air circulation, affects it. Right? So you all know what sourdough bread tastes like, but think about how different the spectrum of sourdough breads are, from the depth and complexity of the starter, the heat at which it was fermented, how long it's been fed, has it been doubled and redoubled properly, right? You know, the sourdough starters from the 1800s taste very different than the sourdoughs that were started this year in COVID. So while I'm not saying sherry tastes like sourdough, what I am saying is as diverse as bread can be based on slight modifications to the yeast situation, so true can that be for sherry, especially for the biological ones, the ones aged under flora, that layer of living yeast. So that's how, like, for those of you that are getting into sherry, how I'd help you understand it. It's just like, it's so endlessly complex that you could make a lifetime out of tasting and studying sherry and barely scratch the surface. So I encourage you to explore and dive deep.
And there are a few more things we may want to touch upon that have been slightly discussed here. One is that Joaquin has an Enrama wine. So maybe we should talk about what Enrama is. And then Eric has not only wines from almacenistas, well, I also have a wine from an almacenista, what an almacenista is. And then Eric, you also have a couple of wines that are quite special. You have a Manzanilla pasada, and then you have a Palo Cortado, and then an Oloroso.
Yeah.
So we have Enrama wines, we have almacenista wines, and then we have in between styles, because we were talking about like the standard ones. But what's a Manzanilla pasada? What's a Palo Cortado? So we could be. Do we have another hour here to
We wish, Lucas. We wish. No, 5.
Listen,
Stick around.
I don't have anywhere else to go, so here's something.
We have about...
Joaquin, what's an Enrama wine?
No, the Enrama wine is a wine that is coming directly from the bota, from the barrel, without any filtering, without any other manipulation. So at the end of the day, it's really what you can find inside the bota, and may have some deposit, and it has more flavor. I mean, this is what I understand is Enrama. So
different color, more intensity, texture.
Some people are a little bit afraid because you can have, I don't know how to say in English, some pozos there.
Sediment.
Some sediment, yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's really the intensity and the real wine. So without any manipulation or after manipulation, filtering it, trying to make it clearer, it's as clear as it comes from the barrel. So it's...
And Eric, what's an almacenista?
So the almacenista is basically like the person responsible for like the premium selection. So Lustau has a line of almacenista designated sherries, and basically the idea here, if I remember correctly, the almacenista was the person who selected the best barrels to ship overseas or to ship to the Brits because they really helped like the sherry trade go on. So like if you got the Almacenista selection, it was like you've got like the best of the best. So Luztal's Almacenista series is like their special selections, their special barrels. In the case of this one, I know we were talking about Manzanilla Pasada. What I love about Manzanilla Pasada is that it kind of borders both major styles. So we sort of talked about there's two predominant production styles of sherry. There's the biological ones. Those are the ones that are aged under that yeast or that floor. And then there's the oxidative ones. These are the ones that are fortified up to 17%, at which point the yeast can't live. It kills it. And so they age oxidatively and tend to be more nutty. A Manzanilla Pasada is basically starts its life biologically, and then that floor is slightly reduced, so it just barely starts to get some oxidative notes in. So it's a long age Manzanilla, which just brings deeper complexity, starting to lean into some of the nutty notes. So it's a really cool bridge. It's quite a rare style, but it's a really cool bridge in style between the like fully biologic and oxidative styles, and it's a great sort of like pulls in every direction. And I love sherries like this with sushi. I love Manzanilla Pasada with Wagyu beef or any like really fatty fish or fatty meat. Grilled lamb, awesome with this stuff. Don't think sherry is just like salami and charcuterie and nuts. It's so much more than that.
Maybe we should talk about food since we're approaching dinner time.
I mean, you got 5 minutes, Lucas. It's your show, buddy.
Lucas, may I? I've introduced a lot of people to sherry, and it's challenging because you have to ask them to wait for the finish, right? The initial aromas can be alarming, and because they're so different from other wines, but the palate is incisive and finish expand. And it is so complex, so you have to kind of hold their hand and say, "Please wait for this to complete itself." And so that's the lesson I learned in trying to turn people into sherry is just to ask them, "Please wait for the entire experience to unfold before you."
Peter, if these wines were French, their price would be unreachable.
Yeah.
To many of us, and the wines and the vineyards, they will be all classified as Grand Cru.
Absolutely. This 70-year-old Oloroso cost me $100. Okay, come on. What would a 70-year-old Burgundy cost you?
$7,000.
Yeah.
Well, I'll say is the newbie in this whole thing. This is every bit as complex a family of wines as you're going to find from any region, and it's I think Eric said it, you could take 3 lifetimes learning just about sherry and barely scratch the surface. And I'll tell you, from the week now that I've been exposed to it, tasted around all the corners, it is an incredible quality wine. As Peter said, extremely affordable.
Yes, the ultimate question here is there any other more value on the market or better value? Is there any other wine that gives you more quality to your dollar? Is there any other wine that offers you more for less?
Riesling.
Yeah. Well, Lucas.
Riesling can be more expensive.
Let me say something. I mean, you're totally right. The value is amazing, but to me, that shouldn't be the driver. The driver is the reward you get out of this wine. I mean, this is like you're tasting like Matthew was saying earlier, like single cask bottlings of single malt whiskey. This is like really special Rieslings. This is so rewarding. That price of the sherry, which is amazing, should be a second thought. You should go into these wines because you can and because you have that curiosity and because you want to try things out. It's not a big risk because of what you said, because the value is there. You can find bottles of sherry for under $50 that will blow your socks off. And I always say that I don't pretend that people just stop drinking what they drink and just drink sherry, but every once in a while, pick up a bottle of sherry. Just give it a go. You're going to be so wonderfully surprised, so incredibly surprised, and it is true. It is true that it is a very different. If you approach it like a wine, you're going to be surprised, and perhaps not in the best possible way, because the flavors are completely unexpected. If you approach it as a spirit, you're going to be surprised, and not perhaps in a positive way either, because it doesn't have the heat, and it doesn't have the alcohol level. But if you approach sherry with an open mind, with curiosity, with the mentality of someone that's in a discovery process, you're going to be rewarded every single time you open a bottle of sherry.
Because of the quality of the wine and the ultimate value. Felipe, this wine to me tastes like maybe a Premier Cru Chablis with more like biological yeastiness, right? But the quality, the intensity, the texture, and the uniqueness should set these wines apart from many others, and the price should be according.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's true that these wines are very underrated, but they're underestimated. And if these were somewhere else, maybe this would be much more expensive. What I want to say with this is that we're very lucky. We're very lucky that we know Jerez and we're enjoying from it. At these prices, because I used to drink a lot of Burgundy, and I don't drink it anymore because I can't afford it. But it gives me as much pleasure as a white Burgundy.
Exactly. You said it. It's about pleasure. It's about reward, and you're gonna get it every single time you open sherry. I think, for those that are new to sherry, and I hope that a lot of people unfamiliar with the category among our viewers tonight, I really, we just gave you a new toy. Just go and play with it. Just go and discover it. Bring it in the kitchen. Just play around. Buy 2 or 3 bottles. Experiment. Discover for yourself. And I think you're going to be rewarded every single time.
Exactly.
Well said.
Well said.
That is an amazing way to end. This was an amazing discussion. The viewers can't believe what an all-star panel this was. But all good things must come to an end. So please, thank you, Benchmark, once again for hosting this lively discussion. Thank you to Eric and the United Sommeliers Foundation for being here with all your knowledge and your support. Thank you for the viewers. Thank you to all the panelists.
This has been another episode of Exploring the Wine Glass. Thanks for listening. If you have suggestions on what topics you would like me to discuss, please reach out on social media. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook as Exploring the Wine Glass. I'm also on LinkedIn as Lori Hoyt-Budd. Of course, you can always email me at exploringthewineglass@gmail.com. If you enjoyed our podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast catcher to help others find me more easily. Until next week, sláinte!